Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Corman Productions, here to talk about This Is Us, Season 6, Episode 2, One Giant Leap. The title sort of makes this a spiritual successor to last season's One Small Step, which was also a Nicky-centric episode. The episode's description reads as follows. Nicky, Rebecca, and Miguel go on a road trip. The episode was directed by Kay Oygen, who's directed 3 different episodes of this series, and he only has one other directorial credit for A Love Tale, the series. The episode was written by Dan Fogelman and Kevin Falls. Now, I'm sad to admit that I am a bit disappointed in this episode. I had high hopes because I saw the preview and it suggested it was going to be a road trip for Miguel, Nicky, and Rebecca, and I thought that had some glorious opportunities. In that same preview, it suggested that we were also going to have a Deja episode. She was going to reunite with Malik, played by Asante Black. I did have concerns about whether the two stories make sense together. How does a story about Deja and a story about Nicky tie together? And unfortunately, those concerns were warranted. Thematically, the two stories do not really gel together. They don't really connect. Unless what we're trying to do here is young love versus older love. But that's not really made clear. I happen to really like the character of Deja, as well as Malik. And I also have a soft spot for Nicky. Unfortunately, in this episode, Deja, who definitely deserves a storyline, she was backgrounded a lot of last season. Her story in this one is given the shaft. I feel like it should have been a separate episode. As it stands, her strand is not really given any kind of depth. I realize that we're setting things up here, but I kind of feel like this should have been a Nicky episode through and through. In Nicky's storyline, I appreciated where some of this went. I appreciated what they were doing. I would have liked for a little bit more, and there are some things that bug me. But we'll get to that in a moment. Before going any further, I will tell you a couple of things. One, this is not a spoiler-free video, so if you haven't seen the episode yet, please go and check it out, and then come back and watch my reaction video. Secondly, if you like this video and want to support the channel, please like, share, and comment, as well as subscribing to my channel. We begin this episode with a montage. We see Rebecca and Miguel getting ready to take their trip with Nick, and then we see Nicky doing the same thing. We also see Deja, and she's getting ready for her little trip to Boston, and I'm pretty sure she's not telling Randall the full truth of what she is doing. And I hope you enjoyed that 5-second glimpse of Randall, because that's the last we're going to see of the big 3 for this episode. Kevin and Kate are completely absent from this episode, and in Kevin's case, that bothers me a little bit. Of all the characters, the one that has the most relationship to Nicky is Kevin. So in my mind, he either should have been on this trip, or we should have at least had a cameo of him at the beginning or at the end. And it bothers me that we don't. Out at the car, Rebecca tries to fish for detail about Sally, who they are embarking on an adventure to see. Nicky claims that he's been in contact with her, which seemed odd to me when he said it, because it didn't seem like a Nicky thing to do. And the preview suggested that Nicky showing up at Sally's was going to be a surprise. So I was a little surprised when Nicky said he had been in contact and that she was in fact single. But Nicky shows absolutely no interest in revealing any further details. Now, at the time, that could very easily be taken as Nicky being Nicky and not wanting to talk about things and being tight-lipped, as the character usually is. When we come back, we are in the car with Miguel, Rebecca, and Nicky. And I think half the reason that these last 2 episodes have these 3 together is because we have to explain why Nicky is at Rebecca's bedside in the future timeline. The odd couple pairing in this episode definitely works for me. It's kind of fun to watch these 3 together. It's sort of a weird dynamic that was established last season, at least between Nicky and Miguel. Miguel and Nicky had seemingly formed a sort of detente of sorts. They even seem like buddies, despite Nicky having some issues with the fact that Miguel, Jack's best friend, is with Jack's wife. Rebecca comments that Jack would probably be smiling down watching the 3 of them together. Nicky isn't as convinced. Miguel ends up putting on music, and we have a brief sing-along that even includes Nicky, which was amusing to watch. And during the course of this, we have a brief flashback to Rebecca and Jack driving in a car, presumably before they even had kids, at the start of their relationship. This is the only time that, well, we do see this once more later on in the episode, but other than those brief flashes, we don't really spend much time in the past timeline. This is one of the few episodes that sticks largely to the present time, which is noteworthy for the show by itself. We cut to Deja and Malik, and I'm basically just gonna avoid talking about these scenes. There's really nothing of substance to talk about here, so this week I'm going to skip this particular storyline. But this is the only interesting part of their plot line. I mean, I guess there's more interest later on, but where Deja meets Jennifer, the mother of Malik's child. And once again, I think this should have been expanded a little bit more. That there's some meat here, some drama that can be mined from this. So this really feels like a wasted opportunity in this episode. We cut back to Miguel, Rebecca, and Nicky. Nicky, who wanted to stop at a store, an antique store as it turns out, to find a camera. And this is where Nicky reveals that he completely lied about the whole catching up with Sally thing. He made up ever talking to her. He doesn't even know if this is the correct Sally, if this is the Sally that he knew. And if I were Miguel and Rebecca, I'd be pissed off that Nicky was taking us on this wild goose chase. I would have found it really funny if they showed up at her house and it turned out to be the completely wrong Sally. That would have served Nicky right. But after a Malik and Deja scene, we see Nicky at the door, ringing the doorbell, with Rebecca and Miguel behind him. He soon realizes that it is in fact her, but she doesn't remember him. Now, given the fact that after the Vietnam War, Nicky basically spent his time in hiding, cut away from the rest of the world, not really experiencing life, the fact that Sally was the most significant thing to happen to Nicky, makes complete sense. Whereas to her, she experienced a lifetime outside of those few moments with Nicky. She went to California without him and proceeded to live her life. And then 50 years passed. She doesn't quite remember him at first, but eventually it clicks in his mind, or rather her mind. The fact that this worked out at all is absurd in itself. But spoiler alert, and yes, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, Nicky doesn't end up getting the girl, which is something I kind of like about the episode. It would have been borderline insane and unrealistic if Nicky ended up walking away with Sally. This Is Us, outside of a few moments, has been a pretty grounded and realistic series. And Nicky showing up at her door randomly 50 years later, finding the right Sally despite not really knowing if it was her or not, and then having it completely work out with them where they end up together, madly in love again, is just completely unrealistic. And that is not the direction the episode takes. And I'm rather thankful for that. They catch up for a while, get reacquainted, and then, oh look, it's Sally's husband! I would make fun of Nicky for the whole not checking the relationship status thing, which would have been on her profile, except for two things. One, Nicky is about 70 years old, and I'm sure he doesn't really know how to use Facebook any. But Sally is also up there in age, probably about the same age, honestly, and so she probably doesn't know how to use Facebook any better, and may not have included a relationship status, and the fact that she was married. Nicky is decidedly upset, and tries to nope out of this scene, but she insists that the three of them stay for dinner. I say four of them because I'm also including the husband in that, but he was already probably going to eat dinner anyway. Or maybe not, as we soon find out. We then proceed to have the most awkward dinner scene in the history of television. I was watching this scene through my fingers. It was that awkward. But also kind of funny. This doesn't really play out the way you would expect. First off, Nicky openly talks about having sex with Sally in front of her husband. And he doesn't really react to that. He doesn't get upset. He doesn't get hostile. He doesn't try to beat Nicky's butt or anything like that. And that could be the difference between a young romance and a much older one. But I genuinely enjoyed the fact that we avoided the cliche. And we were pretty adult with this scene, which has the theme of not sweating the small stuff, which Rebecca expected to be able to do now that she was older. Now that she knows that her memory is eventually going to fail her because of her Alzheimer's. Which comes about because Sally makes a joke about Alzheimer's, and then feels bad when Rebecca reveals that she does in fact have Alzheimer's, which of course Rebecca, being the gracious person that she is, says, oh no, don't worry about it, there's no way that you could have known. And when the scene goes to the point of basically revealing that Sally and her marriage to this man is not exactly great. I thought we were going to go, oh, here we go. Now this is how Nicky and Sally get together, but once again, we completely avoided that. This doesn't end up helping Nicky at all. And I like the fact that the husband basically offers both Miguel and Nicky a drink after the women depart from the scene, because Sally is upset. I also love the fact that although it was Nicky that came down here to see Sally, it is Rebecca that ends up bonding with Sally. They bond over their mutual old age and remembering younger and sometimes better times. Rebecca reveals that her and Miguel, when they got married, used to salsa dance, and then Rebecca stopped when she noticed a younger person basically condescendingly looking at her like she's impressed. Like, wow, it's amazing that someone your age is still salsa dancing. And this comes rather nicely back into the story later in the episode. And by the way, Nicky, who is an alcoholic, ends up declining the offer of a drink, which is kind of funny also in itself. We keep having these little awkward moments, which is really nicely played. I did like the scene a lot, despite it being so awkward. Nicky ends up interrupting Sally and Rebecca's bonding session to tell them that it's time for them to go. As Sally and Rebecca leave the room, Nicky ends up snagging a picture that he sees on the desk of Rebecca and Sally, and then ends up looking at her wall, and he notices something. He notices that he is on that wall, that there's a picture of a much younger version of himself, and he smiles. And he comes outside, and although he's not walking away with the girl like he had hoped, he's still happy, because he made her wall. He was insignificant to her, or rather, he was significant to her after all. And while they're having that conversation, Rebecca and Miguel are in the car. And Rebecca says to him, "You didn't get my best. You didn't get my younger years, like Jack did. And you're going to be around for when things start getting ugly. And that's not really fair to you." And Miguel comes back with a smile and says, "In sickness and in health." And the scene between the two of them is really lovely. Anybody who doesn't like Miguel, at this point, I don't get what your problem is. I understood what your problems were back in the day. I don't understand them anymore. The perception that perhaps Miguel backstabbed Jack, which turned out not to be true, and then moved right in after Jack died, which also is not true, because they were not together until quite a few years later. There is absolutely 100% no reason to hate Miguel. I love the guy, honestly. He's a great guy. And I look forward to seeing more of exploring Rebecca and Miguel's relationship, both in the past and the present. Now here comes the part where I don't like. Nicky makes the decision to move back to where he came from. I don't understand why. He came out there to get to know his nieces and nephews. And I don't really know why we're kicking him out of the story now, because there seems to be much more to say about Nicky. So if this is the last that we see of him, it's not the last that we're going to see of him. If we don't see him again for a while, I'm going to be seriously annoyed. But also, once again, no Kevin in this episode bothers me. We should have had at least a goodbye scene between the two of them, if Nicky is in fact going away for a while. And then, Nicky on the plane ends up flirting with a stewardess, and that turns out to be Nicky's wife in the future. It also turns out to be the person that was in the car that Randall and Deja saw that beeped at them. And I gotta say, that's a ho-hum resolution to that mystery. Wow, a person we've never seen before was the one in the car. If you're gonna make that a mystery, the person in the car should be somebody that we know. And we have never before seen this person until like 2 seconds ago. I'm all for this being the one that Nicky ends up marrying, and I'm all for revealing that. But I don't know. As a conclusion to that twist, it really didn't do it for me, and I didn't really like it that much. It did not work for me at all. So while there was a great deal that I appreciated about this episode, there was some stuff that I didn't like, and it did bring down the episode a little bit to me. It did make the episode disappointing. First off, Deja and Wade's storyline does not belong in this episode. Thematically, it just doesn't hang together. That should have been its own separate thing. There wasn't really enough depth that the both of them deserve. They deserve their own storyline. They're great characters, and there's plenty worth exploring there. I didn't like the fact that Kevin was completely absent from this episode, mostly because of his relationship with Nicky. it makes sense that he should be somehow involved during the course of this episode, even if it's a quick cameo. And I'm not a huge fan of how this episode ended. This was by no means a bad episode, but it's one that didn't quite gel for me. Anyway, that's all I got for you. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can follow me on Twitter at Core Productions. You can join my 2 Facebook page groups. 1, the Corman Productions page, and 2, the This Is Us discussion page. You can buy something from the Corman Productions store on Zazzle. You can buy me a coffee, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. And of course, you can like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Corman Productions, signing off.